Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversation here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow if you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a chat with me, feel free to find me on social media, because I'm probably where you are. And the best way to find out what my handle is, if you go to isaacr11.com, you'll see a list of all the places. All right, with that out of the way, you don't really get very many opportunities to chat with somebody who has helped your career in a positive way, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So my guest today is Jeffrey Snover. Jeffrey, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, howdy, I'm Jeffrey Snover. I don't know, I guess most people know me for inventing PowerShell, but I was a technical fellow at Microsoft, a distinguished engineer at Google, and recently retired. And by the way, I was so glad you added affected your career for the positive. Could have gone either way.
Well, I try. We're going to get into PowerShell, I think, for a lot of this conversation, but I love how people got started. So do you remember when technology introduced itself to you? And, you know, for what it's worth, like some people, they're like, oh, I got this PC and I put it together. Or some people, they built MySpace pages. But like, you know, when did technology first introduce itself to you?
Let's see. So, I got into programming. Well, basically, I was going to college, studying physics and philosophy, and I just kept running out of money. And so then I was like, oh, I got to get a job. And so I'd, run out of money, I'd get a co-op job. And one of those co-op jobs was with Raytheon. And they're like, oh, you're a physics guy. Hey, we got this problem. We have these missiles, and missiles have four-dimensional flight, and then they fly at a tangential to their trajectory, their flight path. And on the missile, we got a seeker that has a look-down angle. And on that look-down angle, we have these two sensors with an angular lookout, and then we've got this pattern, and we're trying to decide whether we have a zigzag pattern or a spiral pattern. And actually, we have no idea whether this thing can see a tank. Can you tell us whether or not it can see a tank if we tell you what the parameters are? I was like, sure. And so this was working on a mainframe. So I taught myself Fortran and did a ton of Cauchy-Euler equations. And if you know that, there's the right-hand rule and it's positive, negative. I mean, it was a blast. I had so much fun with that. Anyway, and so kind of enjoyed that, but then I had enough money, went back to school until I ran out. And then at some point, I was like, I got a job. A buddy of mine was living in Colorado, and so I thought, well, I'll go spend the summer out there. And I got a job at Storage Tech. And at Storage Tech was a manufacturing facility where we were doing disk drives, and they had put in this work in process system that was a complete disaster. And so I got apt to like, hey, can you help these guys out? And at first it was program management, just trying to like get people trained, et cetera. But then they're like, hey, we could use some help. And so then they taught me C programming, systems programming, and it was all Unix on PDP-11s. And oh my heavens, that was just so much fun. I just fell in love with Unix. I fell in love with C. The K&RC book. I don't know, did you ever read the K&RC book? It is still today just like it should be in the National Bureau of Standards in a behind closet marked the definitive standard for writing a programming manual. I mean, it's just such perfection. Anyway, so I just really resonated with that, right? People will tell me, people ask, I'll say that English is my second language. C is my first.
That's fascinating. So let me ask you this. I'm going to fast forward a little bit.
Yep.
So like, I can tell back then you had like this you felt this passion for technology, right? And let me ask you this. Now that you've decided to no longer have like technology a part of your career, like your day-to-day operations and how you work, do you still find that passion for technology still as strong as you did when you first were introduced to it? Or is it a bit different?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. In the sense that, I'm spending a bunch of time trying to, keep up to speed with AI. Like, oh my gosh, that's changing fast.
Sure.
I think that's an exciting area. Spent a lot of time with that. Although I will say I'm also, when I was like fully in the tech world, I basically, time spent on philosophy effectively went to zero. And so I'm spending a bunch more time on that and I'm enjoying that. So now it's sort of a balance. But no, I mean, technology is freaking awesome. I'm a firm believer that technology is the way most of the world's problems are going to get solved.
Sure.
Now, look, I'm not confused. I know that technology has negative side effects, but as it also has positive side effects, and I think that then the negative side effects are dealt with more technology, right? Energy pollutes, then you invent solar energy, doesn't pollute, geothermal, etc. So yeah, I'm a big fan of technology, and I'm a tech optimist.
Tech optimist. All right. So I have some questions about tech optimism a little bit in the future. But I want to ask this, right? So you got started, you're building on mainframe applications, and you were solving, like, in my brain, even today, like some of the problems that you were probably solving were complex. And you had, like, I don't mean this in a negative way, but like lesser tools to solve some of these complex problems. So,
as you ever program with Ed?
No. So my first programming language was Ada. So like that kind of dates.
This is the editor Ed.
Oh no, I have no idea what that is. No.
It's the next time you're on a Linux machine, type Ed or man paste Ed.
Oh, okay.
Ed has one error message, ?
Well, I mean, at least it's an error message. At least it just doesn't continue and you don't know. So like my question is about, like, since you were working with, like, quote unquote lesser tools or tools that weren't as sophisticated, and let's be real, like, over the course of your career, like the developer ecosystem for tooling has changed exponentially is an understatement, right?
Yep.
And I asked people that got started kind of in the same time frame as you do, like, do you feel like being a developer then versus a developer now is the same? Or is it harder? Is it simpler? Is it a different kind of challenging? Like, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's completely different. And, it's that thing about, each generation of technology builds on the previous generation. Well, the previous generation was built by a group of people with a set of tools appropriate for it, right? And so, like I've been telling recently, is that when we went from like assembly language to C, it's like, oh wow, that's amazing. Like all of a sudden, you don't need to know how many registers you have. You don't have to know what the names of them are. You don't have to know what the instruction set are. I mean, that's just amazing. It turned out that for the first N years, probably 5 years of the C phase, knowing those details about how memory worked, how the PDP-11 instruction set worked, made you a better C programmer.
Sure.
After about 5 years, that kind of went away. And the same thing happened when you went from C to C++. I still joke that anybody who thinks of, at the time, anybody who thought of C++ as an object-oriented language ended up producing really crappy systems.
Sure.
And everyone that understood that C++ was just a really good C preprocessor wrote really good systems. You could use it appropriately. So again, it's one of those things. It's like, hey, if you understand C, you can write good C++. And then after time, maybe that went away as well. So I think every generation has those things. They build on it, and the previous generation helps you for a while, and the new generation, and then not so much.
Yeah.
But no, I think we're solving fundamentally different problems,
Sure. No, I agree with that 100%. I think so I have a friend who used the analogy of like layers, right? Like, so, obviously the stack has gotten more and more abstracted over time, right? And like people that were building, they're putting people on the moon using like assembly language, right? Versus today, now people are not even writing code. They're using prompts to, generate very, very rich feature sets for really, really big applications, right? And like, there's this huge, like, if you were to use like the layer, like the cake is very tall, right? Yeah. So from your perspective, like, what is the best level of knowledge you need to have for all the things that what you're currently working on is built on top of? So for an example, like if you're building something for Windows, do you need to know like all the Windows APIs? Do you need to know how the kernel works? Do you need to know how the file system works, like intrinsically? Like, I guess my question is at what point in time do you is it too far down the stack for you to really worry about it?
It really depends upon the software that you're writing, right? So if you're working, if you're writing a device driver, you need to know how the kernel works.
Sure.
If you're writing some, application in Java, that's some GUI application, probably you don't need to understand any of that, right? Some HTML, some Electron app, right? Visual Studio Code, Electron app runs here, runs there. You don't need to know any of that stuff. .NET, same thing. You just don't need to know that stuff until you do. So again, it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah. I like to ask people this too. Like, at what point in time did you recognize that doing stuff in tech was somewhat challenging? Like, and what I don't mean is like, oh, you had a hard program, but it's like I think we were talking about this a little before we got started. Like, there is like a lot of pain in like the developer life, right? Like, when did you realize, or was it quite early on, that you're like, oh, like a lot of my job is just fixing like yesterday's Jeffrey mistakes? Like, when did you realize that loop, that feedback loop, was almost, I guess, is essential to the life of a developer?
Really early on, right? So at Storage Tech, right? I remember getting called, right? It was a production system, 24/7. I remember getting called at 3:00 in the morning because I had the pager, and like, Jeffrey, you have to come in. I said, why? He said, the computer's about to crash. I was like, I don't think so. What do you mean about to crash? And they said, well, we're getting 9-punt errors. I said, what? We're getting 9-punt errors.
9-punt errors.
I was like, let me explain how computers work. They're either working or they're not working.
Sure.
So it's about to crash, doesn't make any sense. And they're like, no. When we see 9-punt errors, it's about to crash. And it's like, okay, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. I got to come in. So I went in there, and it's like, there it is on the 9-punt. It's like, what the hell's a 9-punt? And so then I got to go search all the source code. And what had happened was, somebody had written this code, was not a very good programmer. It's this big, huge, like, do you ever, I don't know when you learned programming, but at some point, like when I wrote my first program, it was like just one big routine. It was main and just code.
Yeah, I took an assembler class in college, and it was like, 100 line, 200 line. It's like, okay, I have no idea what any of this means if I'm looking at it in 6 months. But anyway, I interrupted you. Continue.
No, it's exactly. Then you're like, oh no, you got to do structured programming. You have to have subroutines. So then your main becomes 10 lines, and then it calls this other thing. And that's what this guy had done, right? And the other thing was called 9 yards. Do the whole 9 yards. And then it was hundreds of lines of code where if anything went wrong, it was go to 9-punt. And 9-punt then said printf 9-punt, 9-punt exit.
So
like, the hell?
Yeah, I'm guessing it was like, he was probably, and again, everybody kind of builds things like workarounds like that for a particular reason. I'm guessing that there was an issue that he was they were consistently seeing, and they didn't know how to fix it. So they're like, we're just going to swallow whatever is going on here. Well, maybe.
Indeed, the challenge is that there were like many dozens of cases that all gave the same error message.
Yeah.
And so there I was in the middle of the night on a factory floor, and people like, hey, if this line goes down, it's on you. And it's like, the hell? And there's which of these dozen cases is the problem? Anyway, so that was my early introduction to, hey, this stuff really, really matters.
Yeah.
Like, you got to get it right.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I'm glad that even people that, when you go through sort of these steps as a developer, like I tell the story all the time. Like I have like my first job, like I was working with somebody who had written books with O'Reilly, and I've had him on the show. And I remember him like looking at a line, like 2 lines of code for like, it felt like 5 days. Right. Like he's just looking and looking and looking. And then he figured it out, and he's like, I'm leaving for today. He just left. Like, it's like one of those things, like I cannot be any more productive than I am at this exact moment. So I'm going to cash it in. And, when you see people that have been doing this for a very, very long time, and they're struggling, or they don't really know what's going on, or they feel that pressure, it makes people like me, who I've been doing this for 15 years, but all the time I feel like, I'm not really good at this. And for to people that have been doing it for even longer, it's like, I'm really not that good at this either. So, that with that whole little rant aside, like, how do you feel the life of a developer currently is. Coming from, you've seen like the life of a developer, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, right? Like, what does the life of a developer look like to you today?
Well, it's much better and much worse. Okay, so let's talk about the better part. So first off, I like to say that, my career has two halves.
Sure.
And the first half of my career was very much like my dad's career, right? My dad was an engineer all his life. He did okay, right? And that was as an engineer, as a software developer, you could do okay. You got a good salary, and that was the deal, right? So I worked for for dominant computer vendor of the era for 8 years, and during that 8 years, I think I once got an $800 bonus.
Sure.
So, but I got a salary, and I got access to computers, so it was fine. And then at some point, then I went to work for Tivoli and then Microsoft, and then all of a sudden there was equity and there was bonus, and then all of a sudden you worked for software companies that knew that, hey, these people, when treated well, generate money, and we're going to compensate them accordingly. That's the second half of my career, completely different than the first half. And so then I'd say that a couple of years ago, developers had a fantastic deal, and that today they got a great deal, and then tomorrow they're going to have a good deal, and then after that they're going to have a deal. Like, I think the high water mark in terms of compensation was hit a few years ago, and I think, except for there's always top 1%, these people, top 0.01%. Meta's given somebody $1 billion to do their AI stuff, that kind of crazy stuff. Take off that layer. I think that for developers, compensation, it's going to become less and less and less of a good deal.
Sure.
And the reason for that is I think that the value, if you think about what's adding value, I think the ability to produce code is increasingly less and less value as now more and more of that code can be developed by, first it was outsourcing in expensive places throughout the world. And now it's AI, which is even cheaper outsourcing.
Sure.
And so then I think that goes down. I think the value of capital goes up. Right. So, you spend, X on a server, and then 100X on the programmers develop the software for the servers. Now, all of a sudden, you flip that around. You're just spending tons on the AI and serving compute versus the developers. But I think that this key skill is, in my view, is the folks that know what to program.
Yeah. I think, we were talking about this a little bit. We got started. We can just have the conversation now where it's like, you had asked me, it's like, oh, what do I think about like AI and open source and what's going to happen in that regard? And I kind of gave you like it depends answer. But basically, my thought is, I think that there's still a want and a need for very, very specific problems like artisanal software to be built that an LLM at this point in time cannot solve because it doesn't have enough in the data set. But then there's also the flip of that, where I think that some like open source maintainers are going to feel empowered by being able to use AI to kind of augment their success. This is an example, and then I'll get into your question. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and it was talking about kind of like the labor market and how AI is going to affect it. And the analogy this person gave was around like legal. He's like, well, what's the point of me having junior associates and paralegals when I can have ChatGPT and like one or two lawyers do that? Yep. Okay, that's fair. But there are some specific areas of law that I do not trust an LLM to give me advice on, like corporate structure, incentives, bonuses, these sort of things, right? Because it doesn't know the domain knowledge enough. It doesn't know how my business operates enough. So I need to have like somebody. And he was talking about moving capital from like, I'm not going to have as many associates and lower level lawyers, but I'm going to pay way more for people that are experts, right? And my question to you, like using that whole like analogy, what is your opinion on if AI replaces outsourcing? That's paraphrasing what you said, but like if AI, replaces, going to lower cost markets to find engineers, it also can potentially replace early in career engineers because just because the domain knowledge is somewhat similar. How do we continue to grow the talent pool for engineers? Because eventually people are going to want to retire like you, right? And if you don't hire junior level developers and turn them into senior level developers, in 20 years, there's no more developers. So how do you, what's the balance to you?
Yeah. So I don't know the answer to this. I think it's a crisis for the industry, but I will say this, doing office hours and this topic comes up a lot. Here's what I've been telling people is indeed, I think we have developers have a very good deal with most companies, but again, it's had a high water mark and I think it's going to decline. That said, it's never been easier or cheaper to start your own company.
Yes.
In the past. And so I am very optimistic about a wave of entrepreneurship. Look, I think the country could, the world could deal with, lots and lots of new companies being started. I think there's been this kind of artificial decline on progress because it's been hard to do or whatever. Now there are challenges, distribution, et cetera. But in terms of starting a company, it's never been cheaper. You don't need an office. You don't need an admin.
Sure.
Now, if you know how to code or know how to vibe code, you can be massively amplified. You can go and can say, I had this one, there were a few in my journey, there were a few kind of click stops that said, now there's something here, right? So one of them was at some point someone was talking to me about a company, and I said, "Who are these people?" And I never heard of them. So then I thought, I'll use Gemini. And I said, "Hey, Gemini, you're a product manager, and I want you to do a competitive analysis of this company and tell me what their more market value statements are, et cetera." And it goes off, and it came back in about 12 minutes, and it was shockingly good. Shockingly good. Now, not top level, partner level, world class good, but mid-career good. And it took 12 minutes, whereas a mid-career person probably would have taken 6 weeks. So again, as a startup company, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
You don't need the world's best. By the time you need the world's best, you're going to have enough revenue that you could pay for the world's best. But to start off, you need you as an engineer trying to do product competitive analysis, you probably suck at that. You probably don't know how to do that. But it does a much better the job than you. So again, you can fill yourself out with AI to cover these areas. So I'm wildly optimistic. By the way, and then the other thing is they gave this thing, and I was like, oh wow, that was amazing. And then I asked, well, how would a hyperscaler address these competitive threats? And it came up with a bunch of great strategies. So, it was really one of those kind of turning points. It's there's something there. Now, then there's this thing that people say, well, hey, X sucks, or it's good at this, but it sucks at that. And I am a fan of I'm a believer in the argument that said that right now, AI is probably your worst teammate, but it's not going to be that long before it's a good teammate.
Sure.
And not very long after that before you're the worst member of the team. Well, and again, there's always going to be, it's always lumpy. And that's one of the challenges of AI is we don't know where the edges and the cliffs are. So, that's a challenge. But it is I'm bad with time. I don't know, it was months or a quarter or so ago, but I tried the vibe coding. And it's it's pretty ropey. It's not there. It's really fragile and iffy. And then recently, a couple of weeks ago, I started off with the Opus 4.6 from Claude. And I've just been wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I've asked it to do some pretty complex things, and it's doing it. And I'm pretty shocked.
Well, let me ask you this. So you're an engineer. I think it's safe to say that you have built some very, very successful software, right? What does Jeffrey Snover vibe code?
Let's see.
If you don't want to share it because you're creating up a business, that's totally fine too. I'm just generally curious, is what sort of problems could you not write out? Or is it not a matter of I could write this by hand if I wanted to, but why would I?
Oh, well, this one I actually couldn't because I'm not a GUI guy. And so I had it vibe coding some GUIs. So basically I'm doing some work on So we're going to say this. Sort of trying to would somebody say this? To try and take various schools of thought, yeah, and taxonomize them, right? And then produce these taxonomies of points of view, and then be able to compare those taxonomies, right? So basically, think of this: I mentor a lot of people like how to like navigate work life, right? And so one of the challenges is like, oh, I'm in conflict with X or conflict with this person. I say, hey, listen, Descartes is your friend here. Descartes said, hey, whenever there's a conflict, he said it comes down to one of three things in his discourse on method. He said it is a disagreement on goals and objectives, goals and values. It's a difference in data and facts, or it's a different in method, like how you think about those data and facts to reach your conclusions. So when you have a conflict, lean in with curiosity to find out, hey, do we have the same objectives? If not, what are those different objectives? Okay, if that, then what data are you looking at and how are you thinking about that data? And so what I'm trying to do is to kind of taxonomize these different things into goals and values of methods and data, and be able to analyze different points of view.
So I'm just going to like summarize like that ability to like take a bunch of take a bunch of inputs and coalesce it into something like that is something that is like software was initially built for, right? Like you think about like, productivity tools like Excel or Word or Adobe Photoshop, or it's like these tools were like created because it is too challenging to do it all by hand all the time. So it sounds to me like you have some ideas in your head, and yes, like Jeffrey could go through and you could, look at these things and compare them and write a note and then maybe write another note, but that's consuming, right? Consuming of time. So being able to use a piece of software to do that is fascinating to me because it continues on the story that we've been hearing for years and years and years. It's like, okay, this just accelerates people's productivity. But I still go back to the idea where it's like, I had a professor in college and he gave us this programming assignment. It was like a red-black tree lookup or something like that. And someone asked him in class, like, how long would it take you to write this? And I kid you not, his exact response was, as long as it took me to type it. Like complete flow of thought. Like I know exactly what I need to write. And the only thing that's slowing me down are my fingers. Right. So think about now where it's like, okay, I can literally hit a couple of keys, tab, a couple of keys, or I can go to a prompt. I want a red black tree, look up. It does this. These are the inputs and it builds it. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm in this kind of transitions into the conversation I have a little bit about PowerShell. It's like, if you were to write a prompt today for PowerShell, you have an idea. I have this thing. Okay, command is cool. Like I really like what Bash and what other terminal-based ways of thought are in Linux. I want to write something for Windows. Like, what would the prompt be? Would you think?
Oh, to produce PowerShell?
Yeah, maybe like the first initial prototype that you put a thought about for PowerShell.
Yeah, that'd be great. Actually, I was doing some experiments with that.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, because PowerShell is pretty well specified in terms of like the language spec, and so I thought, hey, I wonder if what would it take to rewrite this thing in Rust? So I took the language spec and I took out all the references to .NET, and there were some issues around memory that is handled very differently in Rust, and I was like, hey, if I gave it that, how could it do? And the thing was, the language spec doesn't describe any of the runtime behavior, so it wasn't enough. Like I start off with the wrong artifacts, but it did a shockingly good job. I mean, I got a shocking amount of stuff done by just starting with the language spec and then providing some overviews. Yeah.
What people are going to
surprising.
What people are going to take from this, people are going to listen to this in the future and they'll be like, "Oh, founder of PowerShell says Rust is better to build PowerShell than .NET," right? Whereas like but it is funny because I've seen this story before, right? Where it's like, "Oh, like hot new thing is out rip out everything that we've done in the past and replace it with this new thing, right?
Yeah.
So, when you were building PowerShell.
Well, let me go back.
Yeah, please
So
do.
why was I doing that? So it's not that there's anything wrong with .NET. .NET, I think the world of .NET, but it is a memory consumer. And so at some point there had been some conversations around, hey, maybe we should go produce Explore, creating a Rust version of PowerShell. And I was like, that's a dumb idea. And then like, why? And I said, well, because you have the same problem, right? So number one is, okay, you wanted to run in this really small environment. Who's going to write the commandlets, right? Like, you got a bootstrapping problem. So you're not going to succeed there. I said, but let's think about this. A bunch of those things already exist, right? The commandlets. You could get those people to go and say, hey, could you just add a -JSON flag and output your stuff at JSON? And then what you could do is, think of the awk pattern, right? You type some stuff and then you pipe it to awk, and awk can have a simple command, or you can say -file, or give a here block, and it could be a really quite large script. So now imagine you say, hey, I got to run whatever, and then say -JSON, and those commands already exist, so you don't have to ask them to do anything other than emit JSON. But then imagine we wrote a PowerShell, a utility that was PowerShell syntax, but basically always took JSON documents in, converted them to objects, and then could do PowerShell syntax processing on it. So you leverage the fact that people already know PowerShell, but then you can do this in this environment, and you wouldn't have everything. It wouldn't be a PowerShell replacement, but all of a sudden you can do where and filter and sort and format and table and for each. Let's pick a small subset, and then that can be really small and really tiny and really fast. So that was the concept I was exploring.
And it's kind of like, this is a gross, like GraphQL, but PowerShell. Kind of right, where it's like, so it's like you're using sort of the fluent style of conversation with the language versus, you have all these specific commands that do very specific things, and they all have, required arguments and all of that. That interesting. I would love to. That's if you have anything that you've written, like I think, we were talking about blog post earlier. A blog post on that would be quite fascinating to read. So, in regards to PowerShell, right?
By the way, in that path, so I started off, I was doing quite good, and then I had I remembered to get the language spec. Yeah. And so I put the language spec in, and actually that took me down the wrong path, because you don't need the full language. Sure. You don't need, because we have types, and we have and like a very rich set of operators and a very rich set of conversions and coercions, et cetera. And it's like, no, you don't need any of that shit. So it was cool. Like learned a bunch, but it set me in the wrong path. But that original idea of saying, hey, let's figure out the right subset to be able to just process JSON, but in a way that people don't have to learn something new.
Yeah. I think the idea, you see this somewhat occasionally where somebody will kind of rewrite the core of something a different way, but like all of the interfaces are different. I'm sorry, all the interfaces are the same, but the core is different because, for your exact reason, like, oh, maybe we're consuming so much memory, or we are using, frameworks or programming concepts that aren't good anymore or not ideal anymore.
That was when the core value, the whole point of PowerShell is not about the technology, it's about the people. And what I wanted to do is we had this idea of, we called it, I don't know if you heard it, we called it the sacred vow. Right? And the sacred vow was, look, I know your hair's on fire, and I'm telling you, take the time and learn PowerShell. And my sacred vow is, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that that's the most valuable investment you ever made in your life, right? And so why did I say that? And the answer was, at the time, still the case, Microsoft would get all hot and heavy about something, and that would last until the very next keynote. And then they get hot and heavy on something else. And then it just kept like, from one keynote to the other, just like, get excited, throw it away. Sure. Get excited, throw it away. By the way, I'll stop with Satya, who's a fantastic leader. He said, hey, we're gonna go to these conferences. We're not going to announce new stuff. Like that's the past. We're going to announce our mission is our mission, and then it's just going to get better. And we're going to expand how it gets better and why it's better. But we're not changing direction every year. It's like, oh, thank you. Anyway, so that was the idea. Like, hey, I'm going to do everything I can so that when you learn this, you can use it again and again and again. So then you say, okay, well, in this environment, though, do I have to learn something whole new? Well, maybe not. That was the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get into a little bit about the origin of PowerShell in a second, but you said something that to me, so a little bit of background on me, people know this. So like I used to help out a lot with like keynotes at Microsoft, right? Like, so like the developer keynotes, like they had Scott Hanselman or Amanda Silver or Donovan Brown, like I used to help out on those a lot. And we used to talk a lot about like keynote driven development. Like, and that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Where it's like,
the worst.
But I remember, and this is just me, before I joined Microsoft years ago, I would go to build and I would get super excited because, oh, we're going to see something new. And then I remember going to a build, I can't remember which one it was, where there wasn't anything new announced. And as a external person to Microsoft at the time, I was kind of sad because I had a kind of pre-built disposition to like, I'm going to see something I've never seen before at this event. And then it goes, I think, more to your, approach where it's like, let's talk about the mission. Let's talk about the stories. Let's talk about the people, and then how technology brings it all together. And as somebody who is kind of a nerd, I was like, where's the thing? Like, where's the cool new thing that makes you like want to like go home and start playing with it, right? And obviously, like keynote development is never really like that. Like, you don't build something and show it on stage and people can go home and use it. Like that never works, right? Unless it's like a new version of .NET or a new version of Visual Studio or whatever. But to your question about like building things for building's sake, like when throughout your career, it doesn't have to be just when you're at Microsoft, but like, when have you ever felt the pressure to like, I have to build something in order to make someone else happy and not make Jeffrey happy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what employment is.
Sure. No, when I said that, I was like, oh, that's probably like, it's like every day. But like, I guess the reason why I'm asking is like, when you've had to concede an opinion of your own that you believe in very, very strongly to an opinion of somebody else solely because you needed to get something done.
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of normal way of doing. It's always sort of a dance, and there's always like information that you don't have, somebody else has, or context that they have. So there's always reasons for that, right? So there's always this kind of like engaged, vigorous, discussion, and then at some point you got to make a call, and sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. But I think where you're kind of getting at is let me tell a story that's I think getting where you're at. So we had just done a version of Windows and released it, and released a whole bunch of new stuff. Yeah. And so then I'm sitting down having a one-on-one with our exec, and he's like, okay, so what do you got to do next? What's the next? And I said, okay, well, we got to finish this. We got to improve these bugs. We got to go fix WMI. We got to add these providers. He's like, no. I need something that pops. I said, pops. How about this? Now it fucking works. Yeah. How's that for pop? Can we say that? He's like, no, that doesn't pop. I was like, oh my God.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a tale old as time, right? Where it's like, the investments in infrastructure in things that don't directly correlate to revenue are always going to be not sexy. Right.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something like that's outside of big tech. That's like every industry suffers from that. Right. Doesn't even have to be tech in general. It's like, OK, is this new thing that we're trying to sell? Like, does it sell, or does it does it bring more value internally? Like, that's always a conversation. So obviously at some point in time, like this is before you started working on PowerShell, you saw an opportunity. You saw what the current terminal-based landscape or ecosystem was, and you thought about creating something. Like, tell me a little bit through the machination of like having this like initial idea, or was it solely a catalyst like, hey, like command sucks, we need something better?
Well, at the time, command did suck, but that wasn't the issue. So, before I had joined, Bill Gates had this famous keynote where he brings up the command window and he types exit. It's character train. He says, that's the last we'll ever see of that.
Sure. Yeah.
It's dead.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then I came in and it's like, hey, we need to have administrative automation model. Oh, what's that? It's a command line interfaces. Like, well, it's dead. It's like, well, we got to bring it back. Because at the time, Microsoft had this vision of admins. It was like schizophrenic, right? On the one hand, it was like GUI, which is, and then the area was like, hey, we figure out your scenario and we write a GUI, and then all you have to do is click next.
Yeah.
Job done, right? And it's like, oh, well, what if the GUI doesn't meet my needs? Well, yeah, of course it doesn't. We're going to go talk to those people, find out what their scenarios are, and then we'll go build the GUI for it. I said, yeah, but what that really translates to is, one, hold your breath for 3 years, and then we'll deliver a solution. Okay,
Sure.
so they got to hold their breath for 3 years. And number two, in enterprises, their scenario changed immediately after you left the room.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
Sure.
These things are constantly changing. So that was one view. And then the other view was, oh, well, admins are as smart as Dave frickin' Cutler, but they can't really deal with if statements that have brackets. So we'll have VB script, we'll have all those APIs that Dave deals with, but the if statement will get rid of the brackets, and that'll solve the problem. It's like, oh my God. And so it's like, no, you need, the Unix guys got it right. We need, a command line interfaces. You try something. Oh, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Because the documentation's always wrong, right? So the real documentation is, how does the system work? You do that by finding out, and then you put it in a file, and then you use that file a couple times, and you say, oh, I got to parameterize it, and then you parameterize it, and then somebody sees it and they say, that's pretty cool, I need that. And then he's like, oh, well, no, it's embarrassing, hold on, let me formalize it. And so you have this staged level. That's what we need. And like, I was not particularly concerned about how to do this. So step number one was, okay, well, let's get the services for Unix, a bunch of Unix utilities, real K shell, bash, and awk grep said, let's ship that for free on Windows. I came that close to getting it shipped in Windows.
Wow.
But then there were concerns around copyleft and, oh, would this mean that blah? So they said, no, you can't ship it in Windows, but you can make it a free download. And so great. And then I discovered, none of that helped. And that's why I understood the true architectural difference between Windows and Unix, right? In Unix, everything's a file.
Yep.
And because it's a file, if you can edit a file and save it and restart a process, you can manage anything, right? So awk grep said, those are management tools, right?
Yep.
Windows, nothing's a file. Nothing's a file. Everything's in APIs with object models, right? So awk didn't work against WMI, grep didn't work against the registry, sed didn't work against Active Directory. There's a gazillion of these things. So we needed something else. And so that's sort of like, that was the inspiration for, shit, we got to do something different.
Sure. As you're going through this process of you're building this thing, like, obviously you come from a Unix background. How much of, obviously, I think the number one differentiator between, obviously other than the platforms, between PowerShell and like Bash or Unix-based programming language is just the syntax. And, how much, were you very much in the mindset of it's going to kind of fit, I guess, the more C-based notation than, were you thinking, or what was your thought process around okay, how much do I want to borrow from what Bash and what ZH does or whatever some other things, or build something anew?
Yeah. So actually, I wrote a blog about this a few weeks ago about how, Windows had, everybody that ever got a D in parsing was empowered to write their own parser for command lines.
Sure.
So every single syntax was supported. It was just complete buffermama. And so now I'll draw a distinction between the command line syntax and then the shell programming syntax and control structures. So I pretty much controlled the command line syntax, and then Jim Truer, superstar Jim Truer and Bruce Payette, they owned the language. And for the command line, basically I was originally, number one, hey, you don't own the parser, I own the parser. Developers have to step away from the parser, my friend. We own that. You'd give us a set of data structures to tell us how to drive the parser, but then we own the parser. And originally it was VMS DCL syntax. I was a Unix guy, and then I had to do some stuff on DCL. And I looked at it and it's like, I hate this. And I hate it. Finally, it's like, hey, I got to do this. It's my job. I said, okay, stop pissing on it just because it's not Unix. Just learn it for what it is.
Sure.
And after about 20 minutes, it's like, shit, this thing's awesome. Why? Because they had this incredible, they only had one parser. Everything was uniform, and they just had this incredibly regular syntax, right? And so the joke was, hey, Jeffrey, they put a fish finder on the backs last night. Can you manage it? It's like, of course I can manage it. Get fish finder get, fish finder show, fish finder backup, blah, blah, blah. And it would just work, right? Because it was so regular. It's like, that's what I want. And so originally it was VMS DCL syntax. And then at some point it's like, yeah, the VMS to NT marketplace is not as interesting as the Unix to VMS to the NT marketplace. So I said, hey, let's switch gears. And at that point, then, because we had a single parser, again, superstar Bruce Payette spent it was less than half an afternoon. I mean, it was like a couple minutes. And then all of a sudden, all the commandlets then had this Unix style syntax. But in terms of the language, Jim and Bruce, I had a very simple notion. Hey, we got to have X, Y, and Z. And then they gave me something that was 10X more than I had asked for. I mean, just in a good way. I mean, just wonderful. And they were, long time Unix folks. And basically, you start off with Bash, POSIX shells, and said, hey, we want to be able to support that syntax. That's why there's $args, et cetera. When it came to the constructs, I said, hey, I want to create a glide path between the GUI, where the GUIs are going to be run on command lines. And so when you run the GUI can teach the command line. Then as people do the command line, I want them to be able to have it teach them C# so that then they can grow in their skills and grow in their paycheck, right? If you get $1 for clicking next on a GUI, you can get $10 for writing PowerShell, and you can get $15 for writing C#. So I want to provide that glide path for folks. And then they just knocked it out of the park.
I never thought about like that, where PowerShell is kind of the entry point to C#. Like, obviously, if you think about it, like in the grand scheme of things, yeah, most definitely. But I never thought of it because, and this is just a gross over characterization that I have. It's like, I think of people that use PowerShell are typically of a very specific skill set in the technology domain. There are people that are system administrators. There's people that are more on the operations side of the house. Not to say they're not developers or engineers, but they have far other things that are a part of their charter, of their work, and scripting is an ease mechanism to do those administrative tasks. Where else I think of an engineer or somebody, they write software features for software, right? And those two things cannot be the same. And obviously that's not true, but when I could think of PowerShell, I think of very much in the operator or system administrator side. And for you to say that one of the original goals of PowerShell was to get people to be, more traditional software engineers, that's a very fascinating statement for me.
Yeah, well, to allow them if they wanted to.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Because, by the way, so now think about it. So, and this is one of the visions we had. Think about the difference between Windows and Unix. In Windows, you hire developers and then you hire admins. In Unix, you just hire people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then some days they come in and they're writing code, and then other days it's like, it's not gonna. I gotta write some admin stuff, and people zig and zag. Back and forth. It's like, that's the right model.
Yeah, and I think it's only because.
By the way, can I also say?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's this famous incident where basically before I had joined, they'd started this study about automation, Windows versus Unix. Then when I got there, the study results came in and they said, hey, bad news. Number one, there are far fewer things you can automate in Windows versus Unix. Second, for the things you can automate, it's 10 times harder to do than on Unix, right? And a Microsoft admin or executive joked, he said, that's okay. Windows admin 10 times cheaper.
Okay. Well, yeah.
And I was horrified and pissed, right? It's like, that's crazy talk, man. I don't want my people to be 10 times cheaper. Yeah. I want them to be 10 times more expensive. I want them to be the most valuable people in the industry. So then the question was, why were they so much cheaper? And the answer is, Well, in a world where you say, hey, it's all about a GUI and your job is to click next, you're not adding any value,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Like literally the secretary could do that. And in fact, there were some things secretaries doing Active Directory administration, right? Doing adding the users. And so there's no value to be added. But I realized that one, that wasn't going to work for the enterprise, and that two, it wasn't going to work for our admins. Now, again, I wanted to be 10 times more expensive. Look, I'll pay you whatever you want if you earn me enough money, right? If you earn me $100 million, I'll pay you 10 million. If you can earn me $1 billion, I pay you 100 million. You know, how much value can you add? I'll pay you accordingly, right? And so if you can't add any value and your tools, there's just no value you can have clicking next. Like how like you can click next faster than the other person? Sure. How much faster? But with automation, you really can do that. And then it really played out well. I mean, the number of people that have come up to me at conferences to tell me their story about how, they tripled their, doubled, tripled, quadrupled their salaries because they got PowerShell.
Yeah.
They learned it. They were the hero of their company. They got recognized, rewarded, and promos. Sometimes they got other jobs and just transformed their lives. I mean, it's just the most gratifying thing ever.
Sure. No, I can only imagine, because I think, at least for me, in my generation of technology, so for, I'm 40. I'm going to turn 40 this year. So that gives you an idea of like when technology was introduced to me. PowerShell has been in my nomenclature my entire professional career, right? To the effect that like if I need to like do some small task, I will typically just write it in PowerShell, right? Like instead of going into my IDE and like building a small console app, like if it's something that's small, I'll do it in PowerShell. But I always think about, to your point earlier about, in the Unix world, like there's just people. I think that corporate structure, at least from my understanding, like if you do one particular job, you typically stay in that one particular job, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're a systems administrator, like you hardly ever go into other domains, right? And if you're doing scripting in like VB script or, command, and then a new tool comes out, even if that tool empowers you to be like a different domain expert, you're still going to do the same thing just with a new tool, right? Like my example being is like, okay, like if I was building web apps and then Node comes out, which allows you to build apps like client apps, not just web apps, whatever, right? I'm still going to like build web apps because I know JavaScript, right? So I guess my point is that do you think that there was success in this kind of mission that you have, or it's like getting people to be, instead of like one domain expert to like a kind of a more fully fledged, like, I don't want to use the term full stack because that's a bad one, but like a more polyglot sort of technologist, knowing scripting, but also like you're learning C# because so you can build like, I guess, more traditional line of business applications. Like, do you think that was successful, or do you think we're still struggling in this world? It's like, if you use PowerShell, you're probably an admin.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people that have made that transition. They said, PowerShell was their gateway programming language, and now they're .NET developers and enjoying it.
I mean, that's good to hear.
I don't know what those numbers are. It'd be interesting to know, but it definitely has happened.
One of the things I want to finish up on, which and this is probably the number one thing about PowerShell that I've always been fascinated about, is like its modularity. Like anybody can write commandlets or modules or whatever for PowerShell, and it just gets added into the ecosystem, right? And when I think of that, I think of open source, I think of community, I think of all these things. Was that something that initially was a part of kind of the charter of PowerShell, where it's like we want people to be able to write their own things and literally just be able to inject it into their experience? Or is that something that came along kind of after, and you noticed that a lot of people were building sort of like long scripts that did a lot of things like, oh, you could probably just take that long script and turn it into like something like more modular?
No, in fact, this is going to be the topic of my keynotes at the PowerShell conferences this year, about how PowerShell was designed for a messy world. And so basically, like I mentioned, Microsoft was in this mode of like, oh, all enthusiastic and then drop it, all
Sure.
enthusiastic and then drop it, et cetera. And it's like, hey, that does not serve our community well. But I always kind of knew, like, hey, I got funding now, but they might kill us after, the next version. And so it's like, but if I design it right, I can give the community the tools where they can take control of their own lives and create a coherent world out of this messy world. Like, I'm going to try and make it as coherent as possible, but if they take me out, man, you're on your own. You got
Sure. Sure.
But I can give you the tools that you can do it. And so things like, hey, developers don't really care about admins, full stop. They just don't. I got the stories about that. And so now it's like, okay, but now you can take their APIs and someone can go and create that a developer an admin abstraction for it and publish it, and everyone can consume it. Oh, but then the developer produced an object that uses some funky object model, right? It's not just properties. It's like, oh, this system property and properties, and they're both hash tables. Oh, well, you can have an adaptive type system, which maps any random object model into a coherent canonical object model so that everything continues to work. Oh, the developer chose some wacky name that doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
You can alias those properties. So basically, there are all these architectural decisions that I made so that the community can go and produce a coherent world out of an incoherent world, whether I'm there or not. And the fact that Microsoft's still investing in it, it's like, wow, that's pretty awesome.
I mean, I think that's one of the things I wanted to kind of finish up with. It's like, PowerShell's been around for a long time, right? I think if you are working in the world of Windows, I mean, now you could do it in Linux too, which I think is crazy to think about. But it's like, if you're specifically in the domain of Windows, you know a little bit of PowerShell. Whether you want to or not, you know a little bit, right? And I would like to wrap up. It's like, what do you think, I've asked this to a few people that have kind of built large things and like what the definition of done is, right? Like when you think about PowerShell, and yes, like new things are being added to it all the time and like new areas of focus. But do you see PowerShell in its current iteration about as feature complete as you could want it? Obviously, with the changes of technology coming, like obviously you don't need to exhaust the entire feature set, but like, does it solve the purpose that you initially thought about when we started to architect it?
Yeah. So let me break that into two. So the first was like, even right before PowerShell version 1 shipped, it came to me like, okay, well, what's your next thing? I said, well, I got to ship this. He says, yeah, but after that. I said, well, then the version 2. I'm like, no, you got to do something new or it's going to hurt your career. It's like, well, it's not done.
Sure.
And so I did version 2. And then they're like, okay, well, what's your next big thing? It's like, well, it's not done. I got to do version 3 and version 4. And I forget what point I finally said, I'm now comfortable enough, because it wasn't done. I'm comfortable enough that there's more to be done, but I don't think it needs me and my full-time participation. And that was probably after 4 or version 5. I can't remember which. And then, then there was the, I'm trying to remember whether I was involved in what my level of involvement was, but I was a key sponsor for making it open source and getting on Linux.
Yeah.
And those were tied together, right? And then that again gives everybody the power to do anything. So you can. I'm not sure what the I'm hearing from the customers. I haven't been that involved in it for a while, so I don't know whether it's effectively done or there's a lot more to be done. But I will say, in terms of like the producing a coherent admin administration interface, that is definitely not done. But I also don't see anybody working on it. Like. The PowerShell team sort of like, hey, this is our swim lane, and then it's up to the rest of the world to produce coherent stuff, and they're not.
So here's a fun question for you before we wrap up. So Jeffrey Snover, they're playing around, and they spin up a version of Ubuntu or Debian or whatever. Are you writing stuff in Bash or in PowerShell?
Oh, definitely PowerShell. It's the first thing I install. Bash, oh my God, it's horrible.
Well, I mean, I just think it's funny. Like because I remember when PowerShell was put onto Linux, And I saw that. I'm like, my first initial thought was, who's going to use this? Because my experience with Linux developers or people that use Linux is like, nah, we're like nothing Microsoft at all, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then WSL comes out, and I sort of like the ecosystem kind of narrows, and people are comfortable working in one and working in the other, and like a lot of current command line utilities usually like that bash style syntax, so like you're not foreign to bash even if you're using Windows and vice versa. But when PowerShell came out on Linux, my immediate first thing was like, is that going to convince somebody who's currently using bash on Linux to use PowerShell? Because I definitely think that there's somebody who's from Windows coming to Linux, they're going to use PowerShell.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, right? I'm not confused here, right? There's no like, I know that those people hate Microsoft, they hate Windows. I mean, it's very strange, right? There's something a little unhinged about that stuff, right? My joke was like, good God, I mean, we're allies with Germany and Japan. Can't we get over this shit?
Well,
what the hell?
Yeah.
No, they couldn't. Anyway, so I was not confused that I was going to be great as a liberator by the Linux community. But back to what I said, my sacred vow, right? I care about my people, my admins, and they've taken their time and they've invested in Windows. And now, hey, wait a second, if they can manage Windows and Linux and manage more of the estate, they're more valuable to their employers. And if to do that, all of a sudden they have to like, look, by the way, so I don't know, you got a Unix, if you're a Unix guy, you got a bookshelf of like failed tools, right? Oh, here's awk, and it doesn't work, so then you need grep, and then that doesn't work, so you need Perl, and then that doesn't work, so you have C# or Python or C or Python or whatever. So it's all these kind of failed things, and you just got to learn.
Sure.
And the idea was like, hey, if you can take your skills and your knowledge and apply it to a new domain and manage it without having to pick up new things, you're more valuable. And it's an easier path for you. So that was the intent there.
Well, and you were successful, like the ultimate, like this will stay around forever, like it ships in Windows, right? Like I remember having a conversation with somebody and they told me if it's in Windows, it'll never go away. Ever, ever, right? And like once something is in Windows, like it's got to be maintained for almost forever, right?
Yeah.
This conversation's been great. I think one of the things that I've learned is that you still, even though you're retired, like you have a passion for the things that you've worked on, the things that you're curious about. And I know that you've been blogging a lot. We were talking before we got started, like, I've gotten a ton of value out of reading some of your stories. And I think that you have a very unique point of view. And I want to just thank you because I think that a lot of people, they retire and then you never see them again. And, it seems to me like you very much want to stay in this ecosystem, just have a different sort of persona in it, which I think is great. So as we wrap up, this is the last question that I have for you. And we talked a little bit about sort of the outlook in tech and with AI and everything. If you were to, like you say, you mentor people. If somebody comes to you and they're 19 or 18 years old and they want to go to college and they're like, oh, I want to really be an engineer. What sort of advice do you give them today? Is it learn how to solve problems? Is it learn learn how to be good in Claude code? Is it figuring out like how to network appropriately and figuring out how to solve problems? Like what sort of advice do you give people?
Yeah. So by the way, all the senior people are talking to each other, asking themselves, what are you telling people? What are you telling people, et cetera. So nobody's got this figured out.
Sure.
And, you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But a couple things. Number one thing I'm adamant about and feel very confident in is your number one skill is your ability to learn. Right? There's always that case in our field. You always knew you were learning something that was going to have a relatively short half-life. Well, that half-life got a lot shorter. Okay, so anything you learn, half-life is pretty short. Next, I'd say that I wouldn't over-index on learning stuff that's going to go away. I think that in college, one of the most important things you can do is learn how to think. And so, there are things investing in durable skills, right? So physics, quantum mechanics, the humanities, right? Liberal arts, the classics. They teach you how to think historically. I like to say that philosophy taught me how to ask the right questions, and that physics taught me how to provide the right answers, right? And those are skills that then, because I don't have any formal training in CS, so then, you just get involved and it's like, okay, well, I can learn, I can figure this out, and I know how to think. Like,
Sure.
hey, what's the essential things here? So I'd say that, I think those are durable skills, thinking skills.
Yeah. The ability to learn, I've always said, if you are willing to learn anything, like at least you'll always stay busy. And I think that's the number one thing is like, as long as you feel like that you're busy in your life and your career, you probably have done a few things. This has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that, I assume a lot of people want to get your thoughts on things, and I really appreciate you taking an hour with me. And one of the things I want to tell folks, if you're not reading Jeffrey's blog, I highly recommend you do so. There'll be a link down below to his website where he's been blogging about all sorts of things, stories on Microsoft, his opinions on things. And I think it's been captivating so far. Like, I don't want to hold you to it, but like, it seems like you're blogging pretty consistently. So hopefully that stays around for a bit.
Yeah. I got a few stories to tell.
Yeah. And so I want to thank you so much for your time. There'll also be some other places to follow him on different social media. So I highly recommend that. So before we sign off, do you have any parting words, my friend?
Yeah. I mean,
Just enjoy, I think this is going to be I just bugged today or just tweeted out today, like if you're not being occasionally overwhelmed by AI, it either means, you're not paying attention, you're not understanding what you're seeing, or you're far sturdier stuff than I am.
Sure.
The change is happening so quick. I don't know whether it's going to accelerate or whether there's at some point we're going to settle down, but it's moving damn fast. I think the next 3 years are going to be sort of a chaos. So put your seatbelt on, take a deep breath. It's fun though, right? And by the way, it's like if you're spending all your time solving like problems using yesterday's technology, you are screwing yourself.
Sure.
Right? You need to carve out a pretty good chunk of time every week, every day would be better, to spend time learning some of these technologies, exploring them. You really do. If you're not doing that, you are gonna wake up one day to a really bad conversation with your boss. When you join the call, HR's there.
Sure.
Right? And that's not a good call.
Sure.
You don't want to be on that call. So you got to really invest in yourself or you're screwing yourself. And that's hard, right? Because you're just getting flooded with we're always overwhelmed. But hey, if you're overwhelmed and you got too much to do, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Just be conscious about it. Fail at those things in order to make time to spend on this stuff. You really need to do it.
I could not subscribe more to that. Again, thank you so much for your time, Jeffrey. This has been an excellent conversation, and I want to thank you for it. And I want to thank the folks who are watching this live and listening in the future. So my name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source. And if you like this, let me know and share with your friends. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day from my friend Jeffrey Snover, the founder of PowerShell. Have a great day. Take care.